before I left, when I left London to go to India to write this book, you will not find enough examples of Indian science to fill your book. There's not enough going on there to justify the subtitle. And it's true, if you look at scientific publications, India is not doing phenomenally well. It is, I think it contributes something like 3% of the world's scientific research output, if you look at publications, which isn't great. But then again, if you look at its trajectory, while Japan, Germany, Britain and France have become steadily less productive scientifically over the last few years, in that time, and this is very recently, just in the last 5 or 6 years, India has become steadily better. So in 2008, which is the most recent figures that we have on scientific output, India published 53% more scientific papers on average in that year than in each of the 5 years that went before, which is a huge rise. And when you compare that to the kind of plateauing that you see in the West, we can see that in the future, if that continues, if we extrapolate, we can see that crossover happening, that countries like India and China taking over. But that doesn't mean that things are going to transform immediately. And this book isn't about facts and figures. In fact, there are very few facts and figures in it. It's about stories. One of the first things I did when I landed in India, I thought I have to go to one of these Indian institutes of technology, these places that are creating these geeks who are leading India into this new geeky society. So I went to the one in Delhi, and I begged the dean, please let me spend a week here pretending to be a student. And he said, you do realise we don't have many girls here, you will stand out. But they let me in anyway, and it was a bit awkward. I studied engineering, and even in Britain you don't get many female engineering students, and male engineers find it very difficult to talk to women at the best of times. So it wasn't easy, but after a week I got pretty far. The first thing that surprised me actually was, I went there expecting to see these really, really smart kids building rockets in their spare time and doing, fixing radios. That's not what it was like. It's actually a very shabby place, given that it's the most competitive college to get into in the whole of India. It was actually quite run down. The lecture rooms had no air conditioning, which was fine for me because I went there in the winter, but in the summer it gets stiflingly hot in there, and that's a condition that students have to work in. And there just didn't seem, I was there at exam time, which fair enough is a difficult time for students, but there just didn't seem to be this kind of spirit of fun, creativity and innovation that you get at a lot of engineering colleges and science institutes in the West especially. And the reason for that is purely because of competition. The Indian education system is particularly demanding, and I would hesitate to say the most demanding in the world because China might be more, but I would say pretty demanding. As an example, in 2009, almost 500,000 Indian teenagers sat the Indian National Engineering College entrance exams, and only 10,000 of them got a place, which puts Harvard in the shade, definitely, MIT, Oxford, Cambridge. That's how difficult they are to get into. And the only way to beat those kind of odds, if you want to be a student at one of these places, is to cram, is to spend your entire childhood, your teenage years, studying for these exams. And that's what they do. There are coaching centres in every village in India. So weekends and evenings are spent revising for these exams. And a teenage kid's years, an entire childhood, can be wasted, not wasted, but spent. Spent. I don't know, should they watch TV? Would that be better? Would that be a better way to spend it? But spent revising. And so by the time they get to college, by the time they get to somewhere like the Indian Institute of Technology, they're burnt out, and they don't have that spirit left in them anymore to devote to also doing stuff on top of their studies. So I spoke to one 22-year-old student. He studied mechanical engineering, and he said to me, when I went to the UK and saw people shut their shops at 5 o'clock, I couldn't understand it. Here, they're open late into the night. Indians work a lot harder than Europeans and Americans. This kid told me that before he went to IIT Delhi, he was coached for 3 hours a day, as well as the 9 hours a day he worked at school anyway. Every weekend, he only got to watch the occasional movie after he finished an exam. And that's quite normal. There's nothing strange about that. And it just, I mean, the proof of the pressure is in these figures from the National Crime Records Bureau. So the most recent ones date 2008, although the problems got worse since then. In that year, more than 2,000 students committed suicide across India because they failed their exams, which just goes to show you how bad the pressure is. And that's why we get the culture that we now associate with Asian engineers and scientists. This idea that they're not so much creative as drone-like, that they're robots, that we can send them work to do, and they'll do it as long as you tell them exactly what to do, but they're not necessarily going to come up with the innovative ideas and the great, you know, the Apple type or the Microsoft type ideas that you want from them. And there is a lot of truth to that stereotype. And spending time in India, it was easy for me to feel disappointed, because I thought, if this is what it's like, then this is not a scientific society, because for science you need creativity, you need to think out of the box. And luckily that wasn't the whole story, there is something underneath that. And where it started, and the reason that things are changing, is that in 1991, you'll have to bear with me, it's a long story, but in 1991, India liberalised its economy. So before that, it was a kind of quasi-socialist state, very bureaucratic, very difficult to travel.